chapter 24, verses 1 to 12. But on the first day of the week, at early dawn, they came to the tomb, taking the spices that they had prepared. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they went in, they did not find the body. While they were perplexed about it, suddenly two men in dazzling clothes stood beside them. The women were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, but has risen. Remember how he told you while he was still in Galilee that the Son of Man must be handed over to the sinners and be crucified, and on the third day rise again." Then they remembered his words, and returning from the tomb, they told all this to the 11 and to all the rest. Now it was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary the mother of James, and the other women with them who told this to the apostles. But these words seemed to them as idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb. Stooping and looking in, he saw the linen cloths by themselves. Then he went home, amazed at what had happened.
Okay, so here it is, Easter morning. And even though you are here physically in worship, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if your mind might be wandering off to that marvelous chocolate Easter bunny that is waiting for you at home. We had a talk about that at breakfast this morning, and if you missed that conversation, I don't know what to tell you. And if you decided to give up something like chocolate for Lent this year, guess what? This is your big day. Very soon now, you'll be able to indulge in your very own chocolate rabbit. Now, I'm going to give you a personality test this morning, sort of. And it has to do with just how you go about eating those chocolate bunnies. If you're the type who chomps off the ears first, then you're practical, organized, and traditional. Someone who values security, and you are extremely loyal. And in spite of being impatient from time to time, everyone likes you. But if you are someone who chews off the tail first, then you are the sort of person who usually takes the road less traveled, and that's because you don't like people knowing just what you're up to. You're a bit cautious and just a little bit sneaky. On the other hand, if you decide to bite or snap off the bunny's head, then you're restless, independent, and always on the go. In other words, you like to get the job done. You have a sparkling personality and make friends easily. But if you are someone who smells the chocolate before eating it, then you're probably a little bit cautious. You tend to have high standards, and you're a very detail-oriented person. You're polite and well-mannered. Of course, you could be the type who just smashes the bunny to smithereens. If that's the case, don't worry. It's not a sign that you're a serial killer. It just means that you're filled with lots of ambition and enthusiasm. You're also a little bit unpredictable, and you keep others guessing. But you could be the type who breaks the bunny in half, and that's a sign that you're pretty much lived your life as being half full, being a little bit skeptical or pessimistic about things. You do have a purpose in life. You want to make others feel as though they have it better than you do. Now, I hope you take this information home with you today as you begin to eat all those chocolate bunnies. And I'm taking my bunny home. I thought about sharing it, but decided against it. I don't know what kind of personality that makes me. We'll have to have a discussion about that. But right now, I'd like you to think about a short three-letter word. This is a very special three-letter word that we use over and over again. Whenever we want listeners or readers to change directions, we use this little word. Yes, officer, I know I was speeding, but I really need to find a rest area, and I had to speed in order to avoid an accident, if you know what I mean. But I didn't mean to break that lamp. It just sort of fell off the table when I threw the ball. Yes, I know I'm not supposed to throw the ball in the house, but it's raining outside and I have to do something. I'm used to hearing it. Heard that one over and over again throughout my years as a mother. Now, just in case you haven't figured it out, that little three-letter word that is so important for us is but. You are paying attention. Do you see how that three-letter word makes us change the direction we're headed? We've all used it one time or another as we attempt to change someone's mind about something that we've done or maybe about to do. In seminary, we were taught the importance of turning our sermons so that they might lead our congregations toward a life-changing direction. And that's what today's gospel lesson is all about. It's about the life-changing direction the gospel writer has in mind for all of us. By the way, did you notice that in today's gospel lesson, the translation we heard from in Luke uses the word but 6 times in 12 verses? As a matter of fact, the very first word in the lesson is but. Right off the bat, Luke is taking us in a new direction. Now, if you were to read the first verses of chapter 23 in Luke, the part that comes just before today's reading, you'd realize that the author of Luke's gospel is telling us about the women who watched Jesus die on the cross. These women stood by while Jesus' body was lifted from the cross and laid in a tomb. They went home afterwards and prepared the proper oils and spices to preserve the body. And after observing the Sabbath, these women intended to go to the tomb and attend to Jesus' body according to the Jewish laws and traditions. The bad news of Jesus' death had rallied the women into action. They were faithful and loving followers, fully aware of what the reality of death now required them to do. They fell into their comfortable roles that morning. And I'm fairly certain that their conversation as they walked toward the tomb didn't have anything to do with how to go about eating chocolate bunnies. But it could have been that their conversation went something like this. Do we have everything we need? What if there are Roman guards at the tomb? How can we roll that heavy stone away? Indeed, rolling that stone out of the way had to take up a good deal of their conversation that morning. Those stones are huge, enormous, and weigh a great deal. It takes several people and a lot of sweat to roll the stones so the tomb can be opened. When they entered the tomb, they were surprised because they couldn't find the body anywhere. What could this empty tomb mean? No one could have imagined this turn of events. But before the women could deal with this new development, they were amazed by the sudden appearance of two men in dazzling clothes. So dazzling the women may have been temporarily blinded by the light. It's no wonder they shrank in fear in that dark, damp tomb. After all, what would we have done? And now here comes that three-letter word again, letting us know that the story is about to turn one more time. But the men in those dazzling clothes said to them, "Why are you looking for the living among the dead? He isn't here," they declare, "but he is risen." Now at this point, I think it's safe to assume that the women must have been convinced they were seeing things that weren't really there. It was more than just confusion. It was downright unbelievable. Really, think about it. If you had been one of these women, would you have believed these guys? But after they managed to calm down, they began to remember everything Jesus had told them earlier when he had tried to prepare them for the day of death, and this day filled with this little three-letter word and all sorts of other nonsense. Yet they also realized that in the midst of tragedy and difficulty, when lives get messy or out of control, we, like these women, want so much to see and believe that darkness is no more powerful than the light, and that the good news of Christ's resurrection is transformation. Granted, we have to read between the lines to see how this news transformed the women. But now, maybe now, we can imagine them exchanging high fives and shouting for joy. So here they are, transformed women shouting for joy, high-fiving each other all the way back to the place where the disciples were hiding out in fear. The women arrived breathless, excited, falling all over themselves, everyone talking at the same time, not making any bit of sense. They were stumbling over their words, trying to explain what they had seen and heard. But the disciples weren't buying any of it. It was all nonsense. An idle tale told by a bunch of silly women whose imagination had run away with them. And I think we can understand where these men were coming from. After all, who would believe such silliness? No one just comes back to life after having died as they knew Jesus had died. The fact was, Jesus was killed on the cross. His body was limp and lifeless. Dead is dead, the disciples reasoned, and Jesus was dead. All this stuff about seeing two strange men dressed in dazzling clothes had to be an illusion or a dream. What could possibly believe who would possibly believe such a ranting bunch of hysterical women? These were the facts, but the reality in the room where the disciples were staying. But the story is going to turn again. But something compelled Peter to get up from his safe, secure hiding place and run out to the tomb to see for himself. If it was really all nonsense, why would he bother doing that? He had to find out. And find out he did. He discovered that the women weren't nuts after all. Jesus was gone, dead, no more. And that's the story today. It's filled with facts that we can grab hold of, facts that we can accept. We know, just as everyone else did, that Jesus died on the cross. After all, we have eyewitness accounts to rely on. And we can accept the fact that Jesus' dead body had to be buried somewhere. We know that in those days, people were laid to rest in cave tombs. Caves are all over the place in Israel. We know that. And we know that these cave graves were sealed with large, huge stones or rocks. We know that bodies were wrapped in linen cloths and that spices and oils were used to keep the bodies from stinking too badly. We know all this. We can easily accept these parts of the story because they make sense. They're logical and reasonable. And in our 21st century minds, we've been conditioned to logic and reason. This part of the story is okay with us. This part of the story makes sense. And we can believe the part about Jesus' death and burial. After all, no one was around to see Jesus take his first steps or his first gasp for breath. No one was around when Jesus shrugged off the linen cloth and stepped out of the tomb. Perhaps if we had an eyewitness account of Jesus actually springing back to life, we could be more comfortable with this story. That's because we tend to like our faith to be tangible, practical, and above all, rational. That's why so many of us get caught up in arguing the details of stories and end up missing the point of the story. And that's what the rest of the Easter story may just be too much for us to grasp. It's a whole lot easier to debate the details concerning the weight of the stone, the types of oils and perfumes the women brought with them that day, or the fact that no one actually saw Jesus get up and walk out of the tomb. But that's not the point. This incredible story insists on turning itself around on us. Just when we're convinced that the story is reasonable and real, some very unusual events happen. Somehow, we have to deal with two weird men who show up declaring that Jesus is alive. Our sense of reality is shaken to its very core when these guys show up. We can get a grip on the Friday part of the story when Jesus was killed and all of his friends and family were filled with the grief and agony of death. God knows we have enough of our own Friday realities to deal with every day. John Edgerton, who is a UCC pastor in Boston, has written this in one of his daily devotionals. He says, "Today I can see that violence will always decide who is right and who is wrong. Today I can see that the tomb is victorious and the cradle empty. Today I can see that only the dead moon looks down from the heaven and all my prayers are wasted in breath. Today I can see the fires of war and I know they will never stop burning. Today I can see the sick and I know they will always be degraded. Today I can see our children and know they will always have to fight each other just to survive." That's the Friday point of view. It's the brutal reality, the tangible world we know that's filled with hate, destruction, mistrust, and all sorts of anxiety. But the Friday reality of Jesus dying on the cross wasn't the end of the story, because that little word, but, we are part of the miracle of Easter. Easter is God's answer to our Friday reality. Easter is our assurance that God hasn't spoken the last word yet. There's more to come, because Easter is the first day of God's week. The prophet Isaiah gives words of hope and the promise of new creation to a group of Israelites who had to face the harsh reality of Friday's despair. Even though the people who had endured the anguish and pain of